So we're now moving to part two of my analysis of the interaction between conservative evangelical YouTuber Alan Parr and fundamentalist apologist Frank Turek. And in this series, we're looking at the section of an interview that Parr did with Turek 3 years ago, in which Parr threw out a various number of questions at Turek about apologetics generally. And in this sequence we're looking at, specifically the question was, how can God kill people in the Old Testament if he's perfect? Now, in the first installment, I considered Turek's initial reply, which was, first of all, to frame the question as coming from an atheist for some reason, and then to say that atheists have no moral foundation in which even to ask the question. And I provided a critical response to that. I've linked that below. Some commenters to that video said, well, what are your views on how would you answer the question? Now, this sequence of videos is not about my views as such. I've made many videos about my views, and I'll include a link as well below to my book, Jesus Loves Canaanites, if you want to hear more about my views. And my views may come in later on in this series of videos. For now, I'm just offering an immediate critical response to Turek's answering of the question posed by Parr. At this point, we're now going to look at the next section. And in this section, Turek offers two replies to Parr. One reply is to say that is to redefine murder as God allowing, to include God allowing people to die. So that every time someone dies, we should understand that as God murdering people. And because we don't, in principle, I guess, have a problem with God allowing people to die, we shouldn't have a problem with allowing God to murder people. That's kind of the reasoning Turek appears to present. And then he also says, in fact, nobody dies anyway, because dying by definition really is just changing your state or position in existence. Those are, to my mind, both terrible responses. But let's watch the clip, and then I will provide my fuller critical reply on the other side.
But secondly, I would ask the question, can God murder anyone? In other words, when God kills somebody, if he exists and he created us, when he kills somebody, is that murder? And the answer is no. Why? Because God is the creator of life and he's the only one that can resurrect it. Look, if Christianity is true, and it is, then when people die, they don't really die. They just change location. They go from this life into the next life. And it's up to God when that happens. Right? God can take us out at 82 or 2. It's up to him because he's the creator of life and he's the sustainer of life and he's the only one that can resurrect life. So what might be immoral for us because we're not God is not immoral for God. In fact, God kills, if God exists, God, and he sustains all life, he kills all of us at some point, right? I mean, right. He pulls his hand away from us. Is that murder for him? No. It's just the natural transition that we all take from this life to the next life. Now, the questions about
I'm going to come to Frank Turek's reply in a moment, but first I want to highlight the problems with the question itself as Alan Parr poses it. Again, his question is this: how can God claim to be moral when he kills innocent people in the Old Testament? Now, as I see it, there are two key problems with this question. The first problem is it focuses on God's actions rather than the actions of human beings. And this is problematic because the central issue for people is not as such God's actions. Rather, it is the actions of human beings. Case in point, what is an example of God directly killing somebody? Well, for example, Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5. God is described as directly killing them. But for most people, the central issue they are dealing with here, when they raise this kind of question of biblical violence, it's not about God having directly killed people. Rather, it's about the Israelites, God's people, killing people. Both God commanding them to kill people, as, for example, Deuteronomy 20:16-18, or 1 Samuel 15:3, and also God appearing to commend the killing of those people, such as the Midianites in Numbers 31, where Moses commands their killing, but God offers no critical response to the slaughter of Midianites. So that's the first problem. that the question itself focuses on the wrong thing. And it's important to note rhetorically what that does for Turek. It gives him an advantage because then he can focus his efforts on God killing people rather than addressing more directly people killing people. So much rides on the kind of question that's presented or the way a problem is framed. And Alan Parr frames the problem incorrectly here. And I don't know if he intentionally framed it incorrectly to make the problem more easier to address, to deflect from the main issue of people killing people. But suffice it to say that the question itself is a problem. There is a second feature of the question, I think, that is a problem. Maybe less so, but it's still worth highlighting. The question asks how God can kill, quote, innocent people. What is problematic about that question is it doesn't give you a fuller picture of what specifically we're talking about here. And I'm going to say this, that the more detail you provide as to what it means, what we're referring to when we talk about innocent people, the deeper the problem becomes. The issue is about God commanding and commending soldiers to kill and slaughter in close contact killing women, the elderly, the infirm, the mentally and physically handicapped, children, infants, everybody. Indiscriminate killing, as we have in passages like Deuteronomy 20 or 1 Samuel 15. I mean, 1 Samuel 15 even specifies the inclusion of infants in that killing. So it's not simply innocent people that are being killed, it's the full range of people, including infants, that are being killed. And to give that kind of specificity and detail to what the problem is only increases the problem even more. So I think for those two reasons, Alan Parr's question is really inadequate in helping to bring us to terms with the depth and nature of the problem itself. Now, let's consider Frank Turek's response to the problem. As we saw here, there are two features of that response, I think both of which are deeply problematic. The first one is I'm going to call these semantic deflections. They kind of focus on redefining terms as a way of deflecting from the main problem. So the first one is he refocuses the issue of God killing or God commanding the killing of people by reframing it in terms of people dying. And then he can say, well, people die, everybody dies. So it's not a particular problem that people are dying in these circumstances. But we're not talking here about people simply dying of quote unquote natural causes. We're talking about people dying because they were impaled or stabbed or bludgeoned by Israelite soldiers under divine command and commendation. That is the issue, not just dying. The manner of God allowing people to die is another issue, and you would have that would be another issue theologically and ethically and apologetically to discuss. But that's not the issue here. The issue is God commanding and commending the killing of people by other people. The last thing to note is that Turek then also says, well, in terms of death itself, it's not really a problem because death is just a matter of changing locations. Now, I've heard Paul Copan also use this talking point, and that's all it is. It's a talking point, and it's a mind-numbing talking point. To say, well, why did God allow or command this person to kill this person? To say, well, healing just is a matter of changing their location. It's like equivalent to moving them from one room into another room. I mean, that is an offense to the mind and to the heart to make that kind of explanation as a way to account for divinely commanded and commended killing. And I want to conclude by just giving you an illustration of how utterly inadequate Frank's two talking points here are, his two semantic deflections. Here is a true story. It's over 20 years ago. In 2004, Dina Schlosser, a young mother, killed her 9-month-old child. And the reason that she killed her 9-month-old child is to offer that child as a gift to God because she believed God wanted her child. So she killed the child. Now, this is a morally heinous action by any measure, a mother killing a child. But any adult killing a healthy 9-month-old by believing God wanted or desired that 9-month-old. But in principle, Turek has given us a twofold framework to explain what happened in the case of Dina Schlosser and her infant. His first response is to say, well, everybody dies. As he actually said in the video, whether you die at 82 or you die at 2 or 9 months, doesn't really matter, right? Everybody dies. So that would be Turek's first response to Dina Schlosser killing her child. Everybody dies. His second response is to say dying itself is just a matter of changing locations. So all Dina Schlosser was doing was changing the location of her 9-month-old from this life to the next life. Do you see how what an utter offense to the mind and the moral imagination and moral reasoning this kind of apologetic response is? To call it semantic deflection, I don't think does it justice for how offensive Turek's apologetic replies in this clip are. So that concludes the second installment of my analysis of Frank Turek's responses to Alan Parr. We're going to turn in the next installment to look further at some of his additional replies.